Welcome to the Best Boss podcast. This is a part 2 on disruptive employees. On the first part, we talked about what disruptive employees are, a little bit about their background, why it's worth addressing them, and some of the issues that they have around their team involving psychological safety and the culture of the work environment. But I thought this part deserved its own podcast. What do you do with it? Most people get it. What do you do with workplace bullies? But now what do you do with it? It's a little bit more elusive. I have been a coach for over 22 years, and I have coached many people labeled disruptive or bullies. And often it's the reason why they're come to coaching. It's a subject that is hard to approach for many people because they will think about high potentials as the people worth investing with. But I can tell you, it has been an honor to coach people whose lives have been changed just by facing some of these issues and actually having their workplace invest in them. Now, when I say how to work and get a disruptive employee to be better, I'm not talking about just tolerating them or writing them up or just waiting until they eventually quit. I actually mean helping them shift in their behavior and take responsibility and re-earn the trust of the people that are around them. Because sometimes the difference between a great team and a toxic one really can come down to one person on that team that affects the entire culture of the team. And here's the leadership truth. While the disruptive employee must own their own behavior, you as their boss or as a member of the organization, you own the culture and the outcomes. You set the tone, you shape the environment, and you have the power to turn this opportunity into a growth instead of a slow implosion. But really, so you're dealing with somebody who's brilliant, often, but exhausting, who erodes psychological safety, breaks the flow of the communication. Now, stick with me because what I'm going to do is help with a disruptive employee. And I'm going to talk about the 3-step process that I use with my disruptive employees. And for the majority of the people that I coach, we're able to make it better. And in some cases, completely turn it around. Now, step 1, it's to get them to own their behavior. Now, how do you do this? Often they're talked to about their behavior. Often they're given examples. Often people sometimes even tiptoe around it. But understanding for them the ownership of their behavior and why it is seen as untoward or not serving them is key. It's step 1. And if you don't do step 1, steps 2 and 3 will not work. Often people will step to a step 3 where they have to apologize or talk to people. It's not sustainable unless they own the fact that their behavior isn't serving them, their culture, or the clients that they serve. It's not going to make any difference. So how do you get somebody to own their behavior? Well, it goes with finding out what they truly value. Not what they say they value, but what their behavior shows that they value. Maya Angelou once said, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Well, often people will tell us who they are, or they'll tell us what we value. We value the clients, the outcomes, the business, the money. In healthcare, it's the patients. A lot of people will say what they value, but when you really look at the actions of what they value, it's something very, very different. So really be a keen observer of what they value. And it's actually not because they're lying when they tell you what they value. They may be unconscious of what they value. There's often a gap between our stated value and our lived behavior because sometimes our stated values are a company line or what we've been learned to think about. And so as a coach, I just don't ask what somebody values. I observe their behaviors, and I encourage people in an organization to do the same. So to begin with, watch what this person fights for. Watch what they complain about. That's the rock that you have to pick up to see, why are they complaining about this? What causes them stress? What causes them joy? What do they really truly care about? There's a little bit of a non-judgment in place. Some people care about their bonus. Some people care about getting promoted. Some people care that they want to feel respected. So if somebody gets angry, for example, if they feel like they're left out of decisions, they may value that they have influence or inclusion. Sometimes they get defensive about being questioned. They might value being seen as competent. If they steamroll over others, it might not just be about ego, but it may be a deep value of found results, their results in many cases. Once we understand those values, we can work with them. We can show them that how they're behaving will affect those values, what they care about. One time, I had a employee of a very large firm who was a chain smoker. And he had been a chain smoker since he was 12. And it really was actually affecting his reputation. And although I don't do this for a living, I'm not a life coach, I'm an executive coach. I talked to him about smoking. And one thing that was the most important part of him was that he valued his family and especially his daughter, who at that time was a teenager. And I said to him, when I was a teenager, I needed my father, but when in my 20s and 30s, my father had passed and I actually needed him more. And I said, your daughter isn't going to be is going to need you more in her 20s and 30s than she needs you now. And you may not be here because you smoke. That day he quit smoking. He'd smoked for 40 years, 40 years. It went to the core of what he valued. He valued his daughter more than anything. And that was enough for him to get one of the most addictive issues ever. See, once you figure out what somebody values, you can actually flip the script on them and say, you know what, when you act, if you're after a bonus, the way you're acting makes it less inclined to get the outcomes that you want and the bonus that you feel like you deserve. If you want respect, the way that you're acting isn't going to give you the respect. Figure out what somebody values and show them how this behavior isn't serving them. When they have that click, when they see that click, it's magic. One time I also worked with a physician leader who was known to blow up in a lot of meetings. And of course, he said he valued patient care, but he was so critical of colleagues. He was aggressive and publicly was like shutting down and harming morale. So I really asked him, and I really found out what he cared about. It was about fairness. Fairness was really important to him when I was watching, because we weren't talking about bad behavior. We were talking about alignment, or more specifically, misalignment between his behavior and the value that he really held dear. That's the moment when the ownership began. When your value is incongruent with the way you're behaving, you often have them. Does this behavior reflect the person that I believe that I am? When the answer is no, it becomes personal. Now, how do you know somebody owns their behavior? There's a simple trick. Whenever they talk about their behavior, yes, I blow up, and they don't use the word but. Yes, sometimes I get angry or go silent during meetings, but that's because nobody's going to listen to me. When you don't hear the word but, you don't hear the excuse for the behavior, and that means they own it. It's the trick. The word but does not equal ownership. So again, hard to figure out what somebody values often. Once you do, show them how their behavior isn't going to help what they value. Now, step 2, remember, they have to be done in this order. It's really getting them to choose another way of responding to triggers. It's choosing a different response. Once they own their behavior, they truly own their behavior. It helps if you help them understand what triggers the behavior bad, what triggers lend themselves down to a destructive path of dealing with the conflict. Now, if you're a boss and you actually might not be the best person to help guide these through the steps, not because you're not capable, but because there's a power dynamics and it can distort the learning process. So that's actually why coaching has been a godsend in many cases, because it really creates more of a psychological safety for them to be more vulnerable. And that's actually where a coach comes in. We're trained to do this, but more importantly, we don't have like a dog in the race for them to do. And really, regardless if you use a coach or try to do this yourself, you have to figure out like what triggers them, what emotion triggers in them, and then how do they behave as a result. Some people have a lot of triggers: disrespect, people speaking out of turn, errors being made, accusations, not getting accolades in a meeting. There's a lot of people have a lot of different triggers, and a lot of triggers are different levels of hot buttons. Some people are very triggerable. Other people, it takes quite a bit. So you have to say to them, okay, that's a trigger. What values does that hit for you? And also, if you think about it, I know that this is the way you respond to that trigger. What behavior would serve you better? This is a little bit trickier because this is something that they've probably done the majority of their life. And now they've got to figure out what to do with it. And if you're a leader trying to manage a disruptive employee, you probably have already so much on your plate. You're watching their performance, the team dynamics, you're dealing with impact on morale, engagement, and retention. So coaching them is it's a kind of a tall order, and it can kind of put you in a tough spot. Remember, the employee owns their behavior. You do not. You own the culture of the organization, and to hope that the demands and resources are proportional. They own their behavior. This is not about what you're doing. This is about them. Now, often when people bring me in, they will say that it's a last chance or a sign of failure. As soon as you can bring somebody in, the better. Nothing's worse than when you're the last chance that a person has. They've already done a lot of damage with their reputation. It's pretty hard to recover. But what I'm imploring upon you is to think about coaching or spending time with them as a leader, as a strategic investment. So the last thing I want to talk about, the final step, is once they own their behavior, 2, they start to choose different ways of approaching triggers. The third is what I call the mea culpa. Mea culpa really comes after ownership and that self-awareness, self-actualization, self-regulation occurs. And that's when the reputation is starting to be repaired. And really, I think that the taking on responsibility and doing the mea culpa, it's actually practice. You actually have to tell people, I'm working on this. Bear with me here. I'm trying to figure out how to respond. Relationships are repaired one-on-one. You can't do a box checking with it. It's actually telling somebody that you're working on it. Perhaps saying to them, you know what, if you ever see me get into some trouble, pull me aside or give me a nudge, or just tell me straight up, you're not acting right. Like, the more you're able to gather a team of supporters, the less likely the disruptive employee will have a chance to cause harm to themselves or the people around them. When you have an army around you watching out for you, it's really an aggressive way of handling a disruptive behavior. It also shows the people that were around him that the organization has supported this person by really working on focusing on their disruptive behavior. As the person starts to rebuild trust, it's also done intentionally, person by person, moment by moment, and really fixing the harm that was caused. Trust has to be almost re-earned or earned for the first time for some people. Now, I've coached many leaders who've made some significant internal shifts, and they start to show up differently in meetings. They're listening more, they're reacting less. Sometimes they feel discouraged because colleagues still don't trust them. And I always say to them, did you actually have some conversations? Actually do anything with people around you other than just hope that they notice that you have good behavior. And that varies amongst people. It's kind of really hard because this mea culpator isn't about image. It's actually about relational repair. And sometimes, or sometimes they say they own their responsibility for their impact, but that's a process. It takes time. These behaviors were not learned overnight, and so the repair isn't done overnight. But healing doesn't work that way. You can't outsource it. You can't do it silently. You actually have to go back to each person. You have to actually say the words. No speeches, no tours, just real moments of ownership. Like you can say, I know you felt dismissed at some of my meetings in the past. That's on me. I'm working on it. And I'm sorry, and I'm working to get better. A lot of people want to help, and you can even say, elicit their help. If you see me ever doing that, please pull me aside and talk to me about it. Or you remember, there's no but, there's no excuses, no hidden agenda. When somebody is doing a mea culpa, they can't say, yes, I've acted badly in the past, but this and this and this was wrong. No but, just sincere relationship, trust rebuilding. So the 3 steps, just to reiterate, getting ownership, figuring out another way to behave when triggers are affected, and the third is relationship repair. I can't implore you enough. This can happen. I've seen it happen more often than not when you hit it right. Please feel free to contact me or email me if you have any questions. It is something I hold near and dear to my heart. I appreciate you listening to part 2 of this 2-part series, and hope to see you soon on future podcasts. Thank you. Bye-bye.